Recording is in progress. Hello, everybody. Daryl Snyder, Brandon Abbey via phone, Fantasy Sports Logic, and we are excited. We have a very special guest, R.C. Fischer. He is going to be contributing some podcasts like the one that you're about to view today, some articles, and some really great insight. R.C.'s been involved in the fantasy sports world for quite a long time. I won't call him old, I'll call him experienced. And he brings something that I find very interesting, and he's going to talk about yesterday's slate. I don't know if he'll go back and reference as far back as Thursday. And then we're going to talk about tonight's showdown slate with the long anticipated Mr. Rogers against the Buffalo Bills. So, RC, it's great to have you here. Why don't you share with the viewers a little bit more about who you are, what you love to be about, and I'll let you take over from here. Nice to see you, RC.
Well, appreciate that, Daryl, and excited to be on, excited to be contributing. My background is I started fantasy football metrics with an analytics angle in mind, a Moneyball thought in mind that got inspired by the book, like many people did, and thought I should try to bring that to football, but I'm sure somebody smarter is going to figure out how to do it before I ever do anything with it. So I saw a window of opportunity way back in the day, and I started tinkering with it, and one thing led to another. And I got into the analytics side of scouting college and pro football for a fantasy and betting um, angle, if you will. And then I learned through years of analytics that I should be watching more tape because there's more on tape to be discovered to go along with the pure numbers and analytics. So I kind of merge those two things together. I watch every football game, every professional game live as they're happening, and then go back through the week and watch them on tape and just try to find clues and things to help fantasy players, DFS players, bettors, prop bettors. I do it all and I share it all on my website, trying to help us all make some money. And unfortunately, I was tasked with watching all of the games on Sunday, which was a shocking chore, um, the likes of which I have never seen before. I have never seen such poor football play in general, being kind of like a wine critic on Sunday. And going back to the Thursday game, just looking at teams that we all know are good, like Kansas City and Cincinnati, and watching them look like they've never even played football together before in their lives, it left me wondering what were they doing all August and July to lead to what we saw on Sunday. And subsequently, that led to scoring being down in fantasy. I mean, radically so. I think it's going to be, after we book the game tonight, it's going to be the lowest scoring week of however you want to look at it. Fantasy teams by position, entire leagues, just the scoring was way down. So one player could really, or one defense from a Sunday night could really change the landscape of a fantasy result. So,
Couple of things on that, RC pointed out. I mean, if you take Tua and Tyreek out of the equation, there was no scoring yesterday. But
don't forget the
what,
Dallas
what's your
defense.
what's your thoughts? I mean, you just ignited, right? They shortened the preseason by a game, right? The exhibition season, and then you had a guy like Burrow who didn't play, and obviously that showed up yesterday. So I'm wondering. I mean, the NFL Players Association didn't want the extra game, but I think maybe what we saw, I mean, talk about preparation, right? It was, how much do you think that really related. I didn't even think about it till you were just saying it. But again, this would have been, they would have had more games to prepare, at least one. And it seemed like in that condensed amount of time, you're wanting to look at who you're going to keep, right? They cut people, then they pull them back onto the practice squad. But what's your thoughts on that?
We probably get a 1, 2, 3 punch of things that happened leading to this surprisingly down week one. And as I was going back in history and looking up the data, it's really been the last couple of years where the week one a couple of years ago was at a certain level, then it dropped from 21 to 22, and then it dropped again from 22 to 23. It's kind of weird, but it's in the era of I'm watching these teams in July and in August practicing either against themselves or in the joint practices, and um they're playing shorts and shells or shorts and helmets and playing essentially two-hand touch. And I'm not making fun of them. That's just the way that it is. And you can't really judge it like a run game from a guy taking a handoff and going off tackle, and the defenders just kind of sticking their hand out like, hey, I could have tackled you, or the rushers coming in and they know if they get within 10 feet of the quarterback, the coaches are going to scream at them. So the defenders are pass rushing and then just going way out of their way so they don't even get close to the quarterbacks. You can't get a good feel for how in sync your offense is, how you're going to react when the live bullets are flying from those types of practices over and over and over again. Um, so I think they're really not ready. I think they're living a delusion when they get to week one that everything looks so great in non-contact and the quarterback's not having to worry about getting touched. So then they get to week one where people are trying to kill each other and they're surprised when everything looks terrible. I know that's a simplification, but I really think there's a lot to that they're just not taking a lot of live bullets, and maybe rightfully so, but it's leading to these weird week ones. Then you got half the games that were in Northeast and the Midwest were spitting down rain half the game, and that led to a bunch of sloppy play and drops and fumbles, um, on top of all of these players really getting after it for the first time. There was a lot of hamstrings and other various injuries that took players off the field. I mean, injuries always happen, but it wasn't like there was a slew of concussions. It was a lot of people grabbing for their hamstrings or what have you. So, like the Seattle game, they lost both of their tackles. You lose your left tackle and your right tackle, especially when that's a strength of your team. Then you get what we saw in the Rams Seattle game, which was a destruction of Seattle.
Right. Yeah. Walker was greatly affected, right? I mean, he had, I think he had 12 or 13 points. But another interesting point to that, and I don't know which way we haven't talked about it. We're going to talk about it, but you look at tonight's game and the advantage that Rodgers has going into that game is he had to figure out who his personnel was. So I think he's more into, okay, who am I going to play with? I know Cobb, I know Lazard, but he was forced to study, right? Instead of like, so I don't know if he really took any time off mentally, like a Burrows. I keep referring to him. He signed that largest contract, 55 million a year. He's nursing the calf thing, right? And then he came out and it was his first game, and it looked like it was his first game, right? I mean, I watched. I kept thinking he's going to click on one of these drives, right? He's going to hit Chase,
Mm-hmm.
and they covered Chase, but so I'll let you. I don't want you to jump to tonight's game, but as you're talking about what was very apparent, it's interesting that, like you say, I think some of the rookies, you saw Richardson. I know you're high on him. I'm sure you'll cover that game, but yeah, it's like I watched what you watched, right? And I I played the Commanders defense. I locked them in across my max 150, and I saw Arizona, and there were some times I was thinking, I mean, they they had a couple field goals. Howell fumbled, threw interceptions, and I kept thinking this was going to bust out my defense. But then as I was looking at the other scores of the game, I was like, I could have took about any defense. They all were like right there. So it was like the advantage I thought I had, even though they ended up still having a nice score for defense. It was pretty much, except for that Charger, Dolphin game, right? And I sort of thought the Seattle Rams game was going to get off. I played Wilson a little bit because I thought that game with Vegas. But what's your thoughts on how some of those others played out?
I thought Seattle was going to be the defense was going to be a good run against the Rams because have had offensive line issues. They don't have a running game, no Cooper Kupp. I thought Seattle would handle them, and they started out kind of taking control of the game, but even right away on the offensive side, the Rams had no trouble with Seattle at all. I thought the Bears were going to give Jordan Love more trouble, and he didn't have the greatest game, but he did cash in on touchdowns, and that game got out of hand. There was a lot of games where a team took it may be too simplistic. It may be I'm seeing things, but watching these games, there were certain games where it just looked like the other team took the will of the game over, and the other team that was had the momentum going against them just rolled over and died. Seattle, Cincinnati, um, the Patriots got out, or the Eagles got out to a fast start, and it looked like that game was going to be over. The Eagles were my best bet and my survivor pick for the week because I think New England is got a ton of personnel issues, and they had offensive line injury issues. And I saw that go up 16-0, and I'm like, great, got this one in the bag. Then the
It
Patriots
got
just took
interesting.
the game. Yeah, the Patriots just took the game over, and the Eagles acted like, is this a scrimmage game? They were moving around at half speed. They couldn't get to the quarterback against third string offensive linemen for the Patriots. And just looking across the board, I was shocked by the poor performances from what we know to be good things from the past. It's not like I was thinking Kenny Pickett might have a decent moment week one to carry it over from the preseason, and he didn't. So that's a speculation that didn't go the way that I thought. But Joe Burrow looking like he's never played NFL football before. If you use Burrow as a litmus test, I think Joe Burrow's the best pure quarterback in the NFL, better than Patrick Mahomes. It's debatable, it's arguable. I just think Burrow's I think he's our modern day Tom Brady. So to go watch him have a under 100-yard game and couldn't connect with a receiver to save his life.
I mean,
And
Higgins
I
had
mean,
zero. Did Higgins have like no catches?
no catches. Did you see how many targets he had?
I well, it was three and out. Like every time I looked, like I mean, he tried
T.
to force it
Higgins,
to Chase, right? And I mean, it was like I kept thinking it was raining, obviously, but it
no.
was raining for Cleveland too, and Watson wasn't having. But anyways, it was like,
Well, I mean, Watson didn't necessarily light it up either, but T. Higgins was no catches on 8 targets. You don't see that unless it's a blizzard or, some apocalyptic weather thing has happened, or it's that time that D the time Denver had all their quarterback room get COVID and they had to use a wide receiver who played quarterback in college, Kendall Hinton. I think he went 1 for 8 or 1 for 9 in the game as a quarterback. I mean, and then
no,
Joe
I
Burrow
got
go
to
and
you. What
Burrow
about
goes,
49ers last year in the playoffs? when
Oh yeah, and last year the 49ers. I mean, at least Christian McCaffrey completed some passes. Um, Burrow was 0 for 8 against T. Higgins, who wants a $1 billion contract.
I mean,
Like,
Boyd get nicked up a little bit? Because I mean, they had it,
I,
and they were all talking about Irv Smith. I got excited, and he's got a tight end, right? And like, I mean,
but the thing about that is the thing that's crazy is, and I can't wait to see this week only because I want to run as far away from week 1 as I can get. Um, I'm interested to see, does week 2, are we all sitting here, and I'll use the Giants as an example, but we could use the Bengals the same way. But the Bengals, we would probably believe more. But whether you think about the Bengals or the Giants, as football followers of whatever degree, we're all probably thinking, those teams are going to snap back next week and take and have their revenge, take it out on the other team, whatever cliche or whatever thought you want to put in there. We all think they're going to turn around. So if Cincinnati goes out next week and Burrow drops 300 plus yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, and 2 of them are to T. Higgins and all that, we'll completely forget about week 1 to some degree, and it'll be like nothing happened. And then I'm going to be sitting there after 2 weeks going, how could a team be so utterly bad one week? That's a good team. I think the Bengals are the best team in the NFL, or at least before I saw Sunday. Now I'm not so sure, but I don't want one game to rattle me like that. Um, but how can a good team look so bad one week and then turn around 5, 6 days later and look fantastic and look like their old selves? Um, so I'm interested to see if that's what happens with them and the Giants, that it was just, hey, the Giants were driving down the field and I'm like, okay, my Giants plus the points bet is looking pretty good here. And then all of a sudden they're like,
what was
okay,
that, the very first
Gano's pretty
series?
automatic. Gano's pretty automatic for a field goal. I'll take a 3-0 lead out of the gates. And then the next thing I know, it's flooding, literally and figuratively.
Well, if I had to forecast, I would say the Bengals have a better shot at bouncing back next week. But I don't know, that's just my opinion.
Well, I
Who do
might be
the
able to
Giants
change.
play?
Well, I might be able to change your opinion because the who the heck are the Bengals playing? But I could tell you this: I know the Giants are playing the Arizona Cardinals, so
Oh, well,
it's.
I do take that.
I
Well,
think you'll want to take that back.
yeah. Was Arizona just staying out on the East Coast and going into New York next week, or is that back in
Or
Arizona?
no, it's in Arizona, which is probably to the Giants' advantage that they get out of New
Get
York
out of
right
New
now.
York, yeah.
I'm looking to
Yeah,
see who
that
Cincinnati's playing. I can't. I'm still in week 1 mode, so I can't get it. They're facing the other offensive juggernaut from week 2, Baltimore.
yeah, that'll be a good game. I'll tune into that one to see the Burrows could be I think definitely higher scoring than that Cleveland
Uh, They're gonna
Cincinnati.
they're gonna take on Baltimore, who has a bad cornerback duo to begin with, or they have a bad cornerback on one side and then Marlon Humphrey on the other, but Marlon Humphrey is going to be out for several weeks. So Baltimore has 2 of the worst corners that are starting in the NFL, and they're going to get theoretically angry Cincinnati week 2. So if there's a game, if there's a time to take advantage of Baltimore, it'll be this week by Cincinnati.
So who's it? Justice Hill and then Edwards, right? That's the two running
Justice
backs. You
Hill and
got him.
Edwards, but they'll elevate Melvin Gordon from the practice squad. I believe he's
Mm.
on the Ravens practice squad. And every time I think Harbaugh's gonna ride with fill in the blank, whether it's Kenyon Drake or they had Devonta Freeman, he always pulls a third running back out of the hat, throws him into the mix when you don't expect it, and then you're sitting there thinking you got something with Gus Edwards, or you got something with even the Kenyon Drake moments or the Freeman. They have a great game, and then you're like, oh, they must be the guy. Then the next week they don't hardly see the ball. So it's either brilliance or madness. So, but it seems like it's going to be Hill and Edwards, but just because Hill scored the 2 touchdowns, it's like Kyron Williams for the Rams. They were just fortunately in the situations that their team was going to score a short touchdown, and so they did. I don't know that there's a Justice Hill explosion coming or a Kyron Williams um, swoon to greatness coming. It's just it was week 1 and it happened. If it happened in week 2, if they had dud week 1s and then they had 2 touchdowns in week 2, we'd care about half as much. But because it happened in week 1, this is the first card dealt in the poker game where it's like all eyes are on that card and everything's being magnified. So that's my job this whole week, is to try to debunk or bunk or whatever all that happened from Sunday. I'm just starting to process the tape now.
I thought I saw surprising, I don't know if it was, I didn't confirm it, but in the Vikings play Eagles next week. Is that what you saw?
Thursday night.
Is that
Yep.
what it is?
Yep. They're the Thursday night game.
Yeah, do you see the line? The opening line?
I thought it was 7.
Yeah, 8 I saw already.
It's up to 8.
Giving the Vikings 8, and that, I mean, if now that game should be a shootout. Am I wrong? I mean, I can't see any way that that's a defensive game, is it? I
The
mean, Jefferson,
Vikings
you got,
the
it's up
Vikings
to the
are not
Eagles
good.
defense. Go
The
ahead.
Vi- the Vikings are not good, but Kirk Cousins is good, and obviously you got Justin Jefferson. They should be able to move the ball, but you would have thought that against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay gave them every opportunity to win that game, and they didn't. So I, I don't know what to expect from them against Philadelphia. Vikings have no run game. Alexander Mattison is not a
Yeah,
run game. Um, so
Madison
it's
didn't look too impressive to me.
no, he's never looked impressive. So I wasn't shocked by him not being impressive against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, to their credit, was on defense. You know, with Tampa Bay, the last 2 years, sometimes you watch them and I'm like, that's the best defense in the NFL. Look at those guys flying around. Then the next game they give up 30 plus points, and you're like, what is Todd Bowles doing? So I don't know if it was just good Tampa Bay showed up Sunday, but they were flying around and they helped keep their team in the game enough to where Baker made a couple, I'll say clutch, someone else might say very lucky throws to keep that game going and to get them the win. But Tampa Bay didn't look great on offense. Minnesota didn't look great in any capacity. They're going to Philadelphia, and obviously Philadelphia is the better all-around team. But then I watched the second the the 3 quarters of the Eagles struggling with the Patriots after getting up 16-0, and I'm like, is there any good team left in the NFL besides the Arizona Cardinals and the
The
Rams
Packers.
and the Packers and the Dallas Cowboy defense?
Yeah, I thought you didn't touch much on the Packers, but you did talk about you talked about that side. But Justin Fields, I thought he was gonna be sort of whatever. Seems like the Packers had a spy on him or something, but he couldn't get going.
I, I watched I focused in on some of that game because I was curious of how it was going to go for Jordan Love, and I thought the Bears defense was going to give them more fits than they did. Um, but I walk away from that game still unsure about Jordan Love. He didn't have the greatest game, but he did have 3 touchdown passes, so that qualifies you as being safe from criticism. But outside of that, it was a little dicey, and the Bears couldn't touch him. He's got either the Packers' offensive line is really good, which is very possible, or the Bears have no pass rush. One way or the other, that's going to usually help launch any quarterback when they have a ton of time, and he had a ton of time. And he took mostly advantage of it. He missed a lot of throws, but he hit on a couple. Um, but the one thing I walk away from that game thinking is something that I've thought possible, or I thought was a given, but then it led up a little bit last year, but now I think it's back to being a given. Justin Fields is probably the worst passing quarterback that's starting for an NFL team this week or this past week or this upcoming week. He is really he probably struggled throwing the ball more than, and it wasn't because, I don't think it was because of the Packers defense per se. He just struggles as a passer, even when the game was out of hand and he was just trying to chip his way back into it or just keep the game moving. He was missing everything that was wide open. He's a great runner. If he's not running, especially for fantasy, switching over to fantasy purposes, if Fields isn't running, I'm not interested because he's not a good passer. DJ Moore got 2 targets in that game.
Yeah, he
Um,
was pissed.
Chase
I
Claypool
saw he was like
had no
looking back
catches
like,
for 2 targets. Yeah. And it's not because Green Bay is so suffocating on defense. It's a good defense, but it's not a great defense. And you should be, NFL quarterbacks of this day and age should be able to complete passes against about any defense as long as they've got some protection. Teams don't rush Justin Fields because they're afraid, they don't rush him as much because they're afraid he's going to take off running, which that's the only thing the Bears have is Justin Fields running. And it just looks to me like if Justin Fields thinks he wants to run that day, watch out. If Justin Fields thinks he's a pocket quarterback like he did for about 3 quarters of this game, um, watch out the other direction because it ain't gonna work. I saw several opportunities where he could have took off and run where he would have last year early in the game, and he just stayed in the pocket and threw passes errantly all over the place. I bet his prop for this prop was 58.5 yards rushing, and so I was extra intent on watching him run, and when he wouldn't, I was screaming at the TV,
I had it
what
at
is he doing?
62 and a half. I thought it was like he had like 2 runs, and I thought he just needs one more. Right?
Yeah,
So they were
and,
they were
and
they were saying throw the ball, and DJ
he
was
was
saying throw the ball, and DJ was like this.
yeah, I was more like run the ball. I need to cover this
Oh, I
prop, and
know.
he got to the 59. I got it at 58.5 because he had beaten 58.5 like 10 out of his last 11 games or something. I'm like, this is a gimme if he runs, but he wasn't running for a bit, but he snuck his way in there. So
Well, you got it. I was middled on that. But one more thing about the Packers that I was impressed, and there wasn't any Watson, right? So when you add Watson to that mix, and you and I talked about it earlier yesterday, right? Romeo, and he looked healthy to me, but that sync was there. So I'm thinking, okay, you have Musgrave, you got the
Musgrave,
tight end, yeah, and now you got that sync with Romeo, and you got Watson's speed, so. Love without Watson, I thought, you get Torrey in there, I think had a nice play or two, right? You talked about him, but so
he
yeah, I
had a
would
near
think the
miss.
Green
Yeah.
Bay fans have a lot. I don't know who they play next week, but Watson, if he's able to come back, and you got Jones who looked fresh to me. He was pounding the ball and the running back. Dylan was a little, so I thought there'd be more balance there, but I didn't see a whole lot from Dylan, but
I'm done with AJ Dillon. Um, this is 4 years of looking at his NFL combine and his pro day and looking at the numbers for a guy his size and going, on paper, this should be the greatest running back in the NFL. He just needs a chance. Why aren't the Packers giving him a chance? He just needs to get away from Aaron Jones. And I said that for 2+ years. And then last year, I'm like, no more. This guy is trying to tell us he's not that good.
you
It
didn't
doesn't
come on.
matter.
You had some more optimism yesterday, didn't you, before the game started?
No, I was not an age. I'm not.
Why didn't you tell me? I drafted him in a few of my
Uh,
best balls, so I would have avoided it.
yeah, AJ Dillon, guys who continually tell me how good they are not by their team not playing them or pushing them are like AJ Dillon, and I'm talking now from an analytics scouting viewpoint, guys that would light up the analytics like AJ Dillon, like Chase Claypool, like Kadarius Toney, I'm done. You've told me enough how bad you are at
Yeah.
football. Your
Well,
teams
you know
that are
what, Tony,
trading you,
yesterday, if he'd have been back as a Giant, he would have done the same thing, nothing.
oh, I mean, these guys get traded from, they're coveted in the NFL draft. I can see on an Excel spreadsheet, that they're, super athletic and all that. They get drafted in the first round of drafts, and then they hit the NFL and they show flashes, and you're like, oh man, if they could just do that consistently. Then you're 2 and 3 years later going, what happened? Like Chase Claypool had a
Still
4
waiting.
touchdown game in his fourth week of his career when he got a chance, and you're like, oh, this guy's going to score 50 touchdowns a season. Great. And then he's been terrible ever since, and his team just dumps him. And Kadarius Toney's debut game was one of the most unbelievable things I'd ever seen. And then we're 2 years later and his team dumps him. So, and AJ Dillon. So the reason why I was confident in hating AJ Dillon this year, and I started hating him last year, not personally, the player. Um, when the Packers were trying to trade for Jonathan Taylor, that's not a sign that like, oh, we love AJ Dillon. We're going to sign
Makes a
him.
lot of
We're going
sense.
to
You
sign him in
imagine?
free agency.
Wow. Yeah. Now that, yeah, when I heard that, they wanted Watson though, but then the Packers said no, right? I mean, they were going to get him on a rental, but one more touch on yesterday's game. Speaking of the opposite end of the spectrum, Tyreek Hill came out and said he was going to receive 2,000 yards, right? And he's going to score. People were like, and then yesterday, if you do the math on how many yards you have and you multiply it out, you might be closer to 3,000. Now we know that's an anomaly, but what do you think
I will,
about that game? I mean,
I will take it. Tyreek Hill is probably the single most owned player of all of my dynasty members on fantasy football metrics, from going way back from when I first saw him in the NFL and couldn't believe what I was seeing. So he's one of my favorite, if not most favorite players in the NFL because of what he has done for me, and my subscribers for fantasy purposes. So I am not shocked, and he won me games because the scoring was so low that a Tyreek Hill or a Tua or the Dallas Cowboys defense literally could have won you the week, because all the rest of the scoring was so awful. And I was the genius that said, pregame, that I was not going to play Tua heavy for DFS, or if I had other options in fantasy, I might look another direction, because
Burrow.
last year, yeah, I would have. And I'm sure someone out there in my
Geno Smith.
group went with Burrow and had Tua on the bench. But watching the Chargers
Yeah, you know
handle
who
him
did?
last year,
You know what you're talking about?
who?
Leonard. That's exactly
Uh,
what he told me.
And I was wholeheartedly saying, let's avoid Tua this first week, because the Chargers made him look the worst I've seen in the Mike McDaniel era. And a similar offense that the Chargers also made look silly was the Jacksonville Jaguars in the first half of the playoff game last season. So I thought, let's just be wary of this. No need to push it if you got better options, like Joe Burrow and his 2 points or whatever he gave us. So
Did he
uh,
get
I
two?
I was in on the Tyreek part. I was a moron with the Tua part. So
He
the
looked.
but the that Tua part of it, I mean, at a certain point, it's like watching the Rams game and watching Puka Nakua catch every pass. I'm sitting there thinking, at some point, what are the defensive coordinators doing? Like, you know, with Tyreek Hill, he's so fast, it's hard to cover him. So I got to give them some
Yeah.
grace. But it's like they just keep throwing it to him, and even when he's covered, he's not covered. He's making catches. I mean, Tyreek Hill's just great, so I can't slam him too bad. but you would think that they would do something to try to stop. He's making two. If you took Tyreek Hill and took him off the team, if he just retired and went on to do other things, and that team didn't have Tyreek, Tua wouldn't even be in a discussion for a contract extension this upcoming off season. Like he'd just be another
Well, you have
quarterback.
Waddle, and I was going to ask you. I mean, he,
But look how
he
Waddle is faded off. I mean, Waddle's fine, but Tyreek Hill is in a special class. I mean, Tyreek Hill belongs in the Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson level class of you've never seen anything like this. I see a
Yeah, you
million
thought it was a
Jalen Waddles.
Mahomes thing, right? And then, but yesterday, I mean, I give Tua credit. I saw normally I watch a game with him and he overshoots a wide open guy. Yesterday he was zoned in.
Yep.
There was I don't know how long, it seemed like it was less than 20 yards where he threw to Tyreek like right over the shoulder of the defender and the ball just, I mean, that's the only place the ball could be, right? And Tyreek like grabs it and I'm like going, this was just like they were in sync. So
Tyreek
I
accomplished two things Sunday. One, he won me. He bailed me out of several fantasy disasters single-handedly, and he probably got lawyers drawing up termination papers for Brandon Staley, ready to just fill in the date and take him for his signature. Like that the clock is now officially ticking and probably struck by that game. Like I don't know how the Chargers management could take another blown game by the Chargers and another depressing game by Justin Herbert, who should be, if not the best quarterback in the NFL statistically, one of the best. And Brandon Staley the best defense Brandon Staley coaches is against his own quarterback. So, but I don't think he's
not
going to be
yeah,
there for long
he
to do
limits him out.
more of it.
Eckler had a nice game, so that was another. You had him, and if you had Tua and Hill and Eckler, and then threw in Jones, and there were there were some pieces there. But let's get to we got tonight. We got a Melly Maker, DraftKings, nice little contest. Excited. I'm not as rabid of a Packer fan as I am a San Francisco Giants baseball fan because I wasn't named after a Packer like I was a Giant, but I followed through the years. It seems like that, Favre sort of did this thing with the Packers and went to the Jets, and then he went to the Vikings, and hopefully this is a Rodgers thing, and he just goes here. But a lot of people, Brandon, who's on the call, he's predicted on our podcast earlier that he thinks Rodgers, as I've heard, has a chip on his shoulder. He wants to go out and show he still has it in him. I think he's been placed in either, okay, show us with the Jets. Receivers, they brought Cobb and Lazard over from where he's familiar with. They've got Wilson, and they picked up Dalvin Cook there late and Breece Hall, but you're playing Buffalo. What's your thoughts on this game, RC?
Well, I think I've heard a lot of, oh, that Buffalo defense. This Buffalo defense, after the first couple weeks of last season, started out white hot, like for 3 or 4 weeks. And then for the rest of the season, the rest of the majority of the season, it was a bottom 10, 15 defense in the league. Thus, Leslie Frazier left on his own accord, and Sean McDermott took the defense over. It was a defense that wasn't great last year. Has a lot of legacy memory of everybody. Oh, it's like the Patriots defense. Oh, Belichick and all that. The Patriots defense just isn't as dominating as we want to think in our head, um, from the glory days. And same thing kind of with the Buffalo Bills over the last couple of years. They that defense to me peaked a couple of years ago, and it's been slowly drifting down. They lost they're going with the middle linebackers that are a middle linebacker that's unproven. Terrell Bernard, I think, is going to get a start at linebacker, and they're going with a second-year corner, Christian Benford, who's really struggled last year. They didn't really address the problems that they had on defense the last 10 or so games of the year, and then you saw them get whacked in the playoffs. Um, they didn't. Not only did they not address them, they're they've got rookies and second year guys that are shaky filling into the spots. So no Von Miller, um, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde are back. Um, so I mean, it's good, but it's not that to be feared defense. I don't think it deserves the respect. Now maybe they'll gain it back tonight, but I haven't seen this defense for their last 10 plus games and bits and pieces in the preseason that made me think, oh, this defense is, they're going to get after the Jets. The Jets do have that kind of defense. But I don't think the Bills have that anymore.
What about the offensive line for the Jets protecting Rodgers?
That's the uh, opposite end of the spectrum. Is the Jets offensive line is very shaky, and the Bills on paper have a pretty good offensive line. If you're going to judge this game by offensive line, you'll give it to the Bills for sure. I would take the Bills offensive line over the Jets defensive line, but the Jets strength is more that back the secondary. So if they can if the Jets secondary gives Rodgers fits like they gave him when he played for Green Bay last year when the Jets uh, beat up the Packers, that's going to give even more time to the defensive line to get past the Jets' weak offensive line. Part of the offensive line issues, um, for the I may be mixing these two teams. Oh, just comparing the offensive lines. Buffalo's should be able to hold the Jets D line, but it'd be interesting to see if the secondary can do so well in coverage that it frees up, maybe gives Buffalo a little offensive line more fits, gives the Jets more opportunity to get after the quarterback, but vice versa. The Jets offensive line can be a sieve, and I don't know how Rodgers is going to try to take advantage of that. I think he can attack them. Um, I think he can attack the Bills away from Tre'Davious White and have a lot of success. What receiver is going to be not against Tre'Davious White is going to be the question. I think Tre'Davious White may chase around Garrett Wilson some, and which is going to open up Lazard and Cobb and the tight ends. So I
What
there's
about
a
Cook out of the backfield or some of that? What's your thoughts on Dalvin coming in
and I
short
think he'll
camp?
use them. I think he'll use Dalvin Cook like he used Aaron Jones, so that should be good for a couple catches. So I think there's an opportunity for Rodgers to concentrate on one side of the field away from Tre'Davious White, wherever White is, and if he's following around Wilson or he isn't, just go away from him, and there might be an opportunity.
What about tight
Because
ends then? Does that open it up for the tight ends for the Packers?
the Bills have really good safeties, and Matt Milano is really good in coverage at linebacker. I don't love this for the tight ends for the Jets, and I think they're going to keep more likely they're going to keep the tight end in more to help block because they know they've got issues. So if they can just hold just a fraction of a second longer because the tight end helps out, um, Aaron Rodgers may be making that call. I mean it sounds like a joke, but I'm not joking. Aaron Rodgers runs that offense, so he's going to be essentially calling the plays and the protections and all that. And when he does that, he usually wants to keep the tight end in so he doesn't get killed. and he'll take his chances with everything else. So I think you can take advantage of the Bills away from Tre'Davious White if he has time, um, and the
Well, I
tight
heard a
end.
lot in camp when Greasy played, that Rodgers even was quoted, I believe, saying how it just felt like the speed, when he was in. To me, we're talking about Cook, and I on our podcast this morning that I listened to on the Sportstopia, they talked about Cook being the lead back and getting a majority of the snaps, and then you got Breesy and Carter, right, still there. But to me, Breesy, if Rodgers can float him out of the backfield with what you're talking about, hold the tight end in for safety. I don't know who the fullback is, but obviously they'd have to have a back. I mean, you can't leave Rodgers naked, I wouldn't think, unless you're, it's just a short. That may be a weapon, but I agree with you. I mean, if everybody's talking about Wilson, right, and if this DB that you're talking about so tough, then that could. Rodgers has played with Lazard. He played with Cobb. Cobb could be, he
That's
likes Cobb, right?
I think he's gonna have more connection, more experience with Lazard and Cobb, and I don't know that the Bills are going to throw their best coverage at either Lazard, or obviously they won't for Cobb. So Tre'Davious White has chased top receivers around. He's battled like Tyreek Hill pretty well. Now he's ACL 2 years ago. He's a year removed from it, so he may be back to top form. And if he is, Rodgers will know that that's not an area to mess with. So if Tre'Davious is on the right, whoever he's on, then the play is probably going to the left in the passing game or middle. I think he's going to stay as far away from Tre'Davious White as possible, because the opposite corner, Christian Benford, is a pretty weak hand NFL wise. Like, he had to win the job in camp type of thing, and it wasn't because he just was so dominant. He just ended up being the best of the group that they're putting out there. So I'm gonna guess Rodgers is gonna attack that side, whoever's gonna be on that side, and in theory, it could be Lazard.
So it opens up the slot, it sounds like, because if you've got, right, which is
Yeah,
going to be, I mean, is Cobb going to run the slot or Lazard or
they're
who's going
that's
to?
they can interchange them. So that's where, I mean, Rodgers could end up playing a two-man game, weaving in and out, Lazard putting him in the slot some. Mecole Hardman is going to be on the field. So when Cobb is in, he'll be the slot, and then when they bring Mecole in, they could put Lazard into the slot.
He's got
They
more
could
speed,
try.
doesn't he? He's a younger of those guys, isn't he? I mean, I remember Kansas
Yeah,
City, wasn't he a speed guy?
yeah, he can't catch, but he's fast. So
Well, just get it to him in the first 10
yeah,
yards and let him shoot the seam, right? You can't, right? Yeah, it was a
and
lot of those track guys, right? You had very few that, right? They're just lightning fast, but hang
and
onto the
Rodgers
ball.
Rodgers wouldn't have as much relationship in theory with him as he would with Lazard and Cobb. So I'll be interested to see tonight just how much that connection from the past really plays out, or does he have something with Wilson that's just undeniable? Um, I I want to say it's going to be a struggle for Wilson, but if a quarterback has enough time, anybody can get open. So, but I don't know if Rodgers is going to be afforded such luxuries.
Well, let's flip back to the other side then. You've obviously got a proven quarterback in Allen. He can take off and run. You've got the Jets with the showed last year defense. I don't know what they did to upgrade, but I hear good things. And then you've got they got rid of the Singletary thing. You got James Cook. You got Harris, came over from New England, right? The other running back, and you got we talked about it. You got Gabe Davis, and then it's a toss-up I've seen. I liked Shakir, but I've seen that Hardy may have beaten him out. So what do you like on that side of the ball? I mean, in the showdown slate, it's captain, and I mean, a lot of people, if you can smash him in, Allen obviously has a way to break the slate. To do that, Hardy is only $200. He's 300 in the captain, so that opens up a lot of possibilities. There, you're more, and Hardy is a return man too, so you got that. He does take one to the house. What's your thoughts on that Buffalo side?
Based on last year, Buffalo's offense really struggled against the Jets both times, as you would think, because the Jets were one of, if not arguably, the best defense, whether the statistics bared it out or not. That was as good a defense as you could watch on any given week. And Buffalo um, had their issues with them. To me, the fact that they went out and got Deontay Hardy, it wasn't like, oh well, we'll pick up this guy that's a free agent and we'll throw him onto the team and see what happens. You get Deontay Hardy because you recognize he's actually a really good wide receiver. That guy can get open on anybody. I, I think Deontay Hardy's one of the most underutilized hidden weapons that's lurking around the NFL because he runs fantastic routes. He's got the speed of a return guy, but he's a thick body, so he's just not a little, you know, water bug skirting around all over
Can
the
he catch
place.
it
And he's,
better than Hardman?
oh yeah, everybody can catch it better than Hardman. Uh,
I set you
I
up on
Hardy Hardy is, to me, at, going back a couple of years ago, the closest thing I would see to Tyreek Hill from 3, 4 years ago
But
was
wait,
Deontay
I
Hardy.
just found this out today. What was his name then? Because it wasn't Hardy, was it?
Yeah, Deontay Harris was how
See,
he.
I mean, right? He's a sniper in two ways. He's
Yeah,
talented and he changed his name.
you
So
can't see his history. But I know his history. That guy is really good, and so I'm not surprised, even though I really like Khalil Shakir. I'm not surprised that Deontay Hardy beat him out for the job. I'm sure the two of them will rotate in and out. Um,
well, Shakir was a
but
little nicked up, and it looks like they cleared him, right? Because you and I talked
yeah,
about that too. But go ahead.
yeah, he should be good to go. He's just a different type of receiver. Hardy's more of a weapon. Shakir's more of a possession um, receiver. But Hardy brings an element that Buffalo didn't have last year. Um, they did with Isaiah McKenzie, but McKenzie is not as good a receiver as Hardy was.
And Allen, there were some games he hit McKenzie, and I remember
Yeah.
McKenzie had some big games. And
So if you
so
think of
my
Hardy
question is,
as,
why is this guy $200? Right? Is
yeah,
DraftKings trying to slide him down to the bottom? I mean,
Deontay
$200.
Harris is probably 1,000, and then Deontay Hardy is
He got
200.
demoted
They don't
by
know
his
who he
name
is.
change.
Um,
Go
uh,
ahead.
but I would think of, just the shorthand that Deontay Hardy is the better Isaiah McKenzie, much better receiver. And Isaiah McKenzie's a decent receiver, so you probably see Deontay Hardy get one or two jet sweeps like McKenzie would get. Um, and then Josh Allen, when it was there, when the matchup was right, McKenzie had some great games. So I think the Bills going out and getting Hardy on purpose. It's not like they just picked him up for the league minimum and they were shocked by his ability. They paid him money to come here. And then them going out of their way to draft Dalton Kincaid, I think was them looking at team defenses like Miami, like the Jets, and going, we're not going to be able to beat these guys with the corners that they have. Like if Miami had Jalen Ramsey, I don't know if anybody'd complete a pass on the outside against the Miami Dolphins with Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey. So you have to attack these two teams differently. You can't play the same style ball that Buffalo has typically done, and that's Diggs on one side, Davis on the other, go deep, and we'll find somebody because Josh Allen's great. Now you got Hardy who can work in between the hashes, and he can take a bubble screen and take it to the house with the best of them. Then you take Dalton Kincaid, and Dalton Kincaid, for my money, is the best in my decade plus of scouting. He's the best route running, get open tight end I've ever scouted. Kyle Pitts is way up there too, but Dalton
Where'd
Kincaid,
Kincaid come out of? What college?
Utah,
Hmm.
that he's
Was
virtually
Rising?
uncoverable. Yeah, he's virtually uncoverable. If you try to put a linebacker on him, he's going to leave him in the dust when he makes his cut. If you try to put a safety or a corner on him, he's 6'4", 250 plus. He can box you out and play a power game against them. So they went out and got these two unique weapons, just in my opinion, just for these Jets and Dolphins games. And plus, the Patriots um, you know, have notoriously had good corners, and they got Christian Gonzalez in the draft as well. So the way to be unique for Buffalo, the way for Buffalo to change their offense up is to incorporate Hardy and especially Kincaid, and they can try to model themselves after the team that continues to beat them, the Kansas City Chiefs. They can have their own Travis Kelce. So I'm interested to see if they went through all of this maneuvering and their offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey doesn't do anything with it, which is very possible. It's very possible that they let all of these weapons go to waste, even though they've talked about it all year. Last year, they drafted James Cook highly, and James Cook's claim to fame was the best receiving running back in the draft last year. So, okay, we drafted him and we're going to use him in all kinds of creative ways. And then they get him in and they don't use him in any type of creative ways. They don't
The
really use him in
late
the
in the year,
passing game.
late in the year he was decent, right? It
Yeah,
seemed like he kind of took
oh yeah,
over.
he had a he was doing well as a runner, but he was really drafted, and his claim to fame was that he was this pass game weapon that you could use for bubble screens and downfield wheel routes. Like hey, this is another wide receiver on the
Was he
field
Georgia? Is that where he came out of?
out of Georgia. And
Yeah.
then he got on the team, and they did not use him one bit like that. They used him as just another running back. So I'm a little hesitant. I'm curious to watch and see. Did they get Hardy and Kincaid and talk about it, and then they don't do anything with it in a moment like this that warrants some unique style of play, that James Cook should have a minimum of 5 targets tonight. Kincaid should have a minimum of 5 targets tonight. Hardy should have a minimum of 5 touches, run game and pass game.
I mean, you
It,
got me wanting to stack. I mean, if you take
if
those
you
are going to be very different.
well,
I mean, Hardy had a couple $100. The thing with Kincaid is it seems like Allen has that rapport with Knox, right? I mean, they just know each other, and I know that he didn't go to him as much last year, but I mean, if you go into the Millie Maker and look and say, okay, I mean, Kincaid, he had a nice preseason too, didn't he? I mean, in the shortened one, I thought he had some
yeah,
series where
yeah, you
where
could see the flashes of what was to come. I mean, Dawson Knox is okay, and he was a clever touchdown throw when defenses were focused on everything else, and Knox kind of slipped out and got himself open, and especially for touchdowns. But they didn't draft Dalton Kincaid because they're over the moon thinking that Dawson Knox is the next Travis Kelce. They got Dalton Kincaid for a reason. And they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and then Kincaid's going to be like the slot receiver in 2 tight end sets. And the Jets could see it coming. The Jets will know he's on the field. They will be powerless to stop him if Kincaid doesn't have too big a stars in his eyes from opening night as a rookie, and if they just will use them and not pull a Ken Dorsey 2022 and draft a guy with this special set of unique skills and then not use it that way at all. Um, if that happens, if Kincaid doesn't get many touches and the Bills lose, there's going to be a revolt going on in Buffalo next week.
Well, I mean, it's going to be. I mean, you talk about this is probably the most weapons that Allen's had, and look how good he's been already. So I'm hearing what you say, right? You got Gabe Davis, who great receiver. Diggs, obviously, they don't have to build up Diggs, and then all of a sudden you
But you
got
let them
Hardy
go
and you
out to
got
die.
Kincaid and you got Cooks. I mean, that even makes how you get a key on Allen, right? Now you can send all those guys, and then Allen just like he's like, okay, you guys covered him. I'm going right. I'm taking off for 15 like he does,
You
or
send
he's going to sit
Davis,
back and that it sounds like they're just loaded on the offensive side, right? I mean, where are
you
they weak?
send you send Davis and Diggs against the Jets. You send them deep. You set them on fire like a Viking funeral, and you just push those ships out to the outside and let them take Gardner and um, DJ Reed on the other side. Let them take them downfield, and then you just operate everything else with your running back, tight end, and slot receiver, or Allen just taking off and running his way to glory. That's how,
I
in
mean,
my
it even
mind,
opens it up for Cooks out of the
yeah,
backfield. I mean, there's your
yeah.
like you said, it's like
So
okay, you send them, and then they're trying to cover, and then what are they
in
going
my
to put a
mind,
linebacker on
yeah,
Cooks? I mean, how are they going to cover him?
in my mind, that's the way I would think they would play it. In reality, it's like with Jahmyr Gibbs. Detroit talks the entire offseason about all the unique and creative ways they're going to use Jahmyr Gibbs. And then in the biggest spectacle the Detroit Lions have been in a long time, the opening night, Thursday night football against the defending champions, where you have to pull out all the stops and use all your best weapons. Jahmyr Gibbs got a jet sweep, I think. That was
They won though.
the
They won.
summer of creativity with Jahmyr Gibbs was he got a jet sweep. Now I say that from the perspective of that everybody can talking about, oh, Kincaid, he's the greatest get open guy, and James Cook is such a great receiving running back. If somebody on the Buffalo Bills doesn't call the play, doesn't set up the plays for these guys, then it's all just going to be a bunch of talk like it was with Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, in the Lions won that game, so they beat Kansas City. But the biggest difference I see there is Goff isn't Allen. So you're gonna the dynamics, right? Allen is a dual. I mean, Goff, what's his rushing career total yards? 50 in all the times, or how has he ever taken off as a lineman quarterback? So I think that dynamic with what you're saying. I mean, Gibbs was to me he was so built up, right? It was like I mean, he must have went in the top 10 of so many best ball, right? And they obviously brought in Montgomery, who you and I talked about this, right? You're saying he's a veteran, he knows what to do. He's in a right.
They
They
didn't,
brought
yeah,
him
they
in
didn't
from the
pay him,
Bears.
they didn't pay him $20 million to watch Jahmyr Gibbs. So and my whole point on all of it is these coaches and media will talk about all of these, what may be obvious things or not, and then we watch the teams not do it. So that would be the downside to Kincaid, especially tonight, is it makes so much sense that it doesn't happen. Just call Kyle Pitts and ask him how his Atlanta Falcons career is going. It's not a Kyle Pitts problem.
Right,
It's the offense's coordinator
right.
and head coach's issue that he's going to waste. So I'm interested to see if the Buffalo Bills follow suit and let another unique weapon go to absolute waste because they don't really have a playbook for it. They think they do. They got one special play in there for him, and then he gets 2 targets, and we're all like, why in the world did you move up in the draft to get this guy? if you're
Well,
not
we'll
going to
know,
use them
yeah.
on Monday Night Football in a divisional battle.
Yeah, great points. I mean, you got me excited now to think the total's too low. I mean, you look at the weapons. I know you don't have as much defense on the Buffalo side. I agree. I saw it was Buffalo. It seemed to me they were better in inclement weather games because it was Buffalo, right? But they didn't. I wasn't afraid of that defense. The
But
Jets
all
were
these,
better, but what?
but take into consideration that this is week 1, and what we saw Sunday week 1 of all these teams for all
I
the
know,
reasons that we were
right?
saying, they're all sloppy, and then you dump a bunch of mist pouring down on them, and then hope that the over is going to come through. It didn't really work that well Sunday for like fantasy results.
That
So
might be
that would
why
be the
people tend to keep they bet it down. But I mean, Rodgers with something to prove. I don't think he's going to hand it off, 80% of the time. I think he's going to try to get to his uh, his skilled receivers. So I appreciate it. So you know what I got? I'm going to put Mr. Hardy, Mr. Kincaid, and Mr. Cooks in a little mini stack.
all right. I need at least one of them to do something, but I'll take all 3 of them doing something.
And I'll fade Diggs. I'll say, Diggs, you just go out there and attract a lot of attention, and I'll fade Davis, right? And everybody else will be on him. I mean, Allen and
I
Diggs are
pl-
going to be.
I played the props over on James Cook rushing yardage and receiving yardage. His receiving yardage is like 11. So that's the whole game to me. The history, Vegas basing the lines on history, shows you how much they disrespect the way Buffalo uses James Cook
I
in
mean,
the passing
11
game.
yards
They have him
receiving.
at
That's
like
like one
11 and a
pass,
half. Yeah.
isn't it?
So, but that's it, maybe all he gets. Um, so if Cook crushes that line, then if you told me only one thing from this game, if you got out of your DeLorean and visited me from the future and said, "Hey, you're not going to believe this. James Cook caught 7 passes for 60 yards in the Monday night game," I would think I'll bet the Buffalo Bills won this game. Or if you told me, "Hey, Dalton Kincaid caught 7 passes for 70 yards," I'll guarantee you the Buffalo Bills won this game. But if you come back and go, "Yeah, Kincaid got a target and Dawson Knox had 3 catches for 40 yards," I would be like, "Well, I guess the Buffalo got their butts handed to them."
Well, one thing for sure, we'll know the next podcast we do. RC, thank you. You can find RC at ffmetrics.com. You're going to be able to see his player projection. Leonard is excited. He's going to get him inside the Contrarian Edge Optimizer. I know you're going to contribute some articles, but I appreciate you coming on. I know this was sort of impromptu and you had a few things happening on Monday, recapping everything, but excited to welcome you to the team of Sportstopia, which I had up earlier on the screen, and Fantasy Sports Logic, Contrarian Edge. I know you've been doing some things with optimizers for a while, but excited. Anything in closing you'd like to say?
Well, congratulations on the launch of all of those things, and excited to contribute and talk about football and try to help make people a profit out of this football season, whether that's DFS, fantasy, prop betting. We need to run a profit. All personally, we need to take some of Vegas's money and have a good year every
And even
year.
some of those
So
fantasy platforms, right?
yeah, that is my commitment. Is I'm trying to be a profiteer for the fantasy, DFS, and prop betting, so
Well,
that's
tonight
one
I'm
way or
going
the
to try to
other.
put it, I'm going to take everything that you just said, and I put, I don't know, I think 40 to 50 in the Millie Maker at $15, and I'm going to turn it into the possibility of the Millie Maker tonight. So last week, I don't know if you remember, I was 3.1 points from first place, but the separation between that was $76,000 that I would have taken home instead of $62. So this.
Don't remind every time I think about that, I lose another hour of sleep a night.
Well, we're going to
We've
go
got to
for it
get
tonight.
we've got to get you to hit a 5-digit at least winner tonight, and I don't mean with the decimal included.
Right. Well, I have it's 2:24 and it doesn't go out. I have 3 hours, but I'm gonna work with the optimizer. I'm gonna be heavy on Hardy, Kincaid, and Cooks, and create
Okay.
some.
That means I'm gonna go bet Knox and Shakir and
Don't do that to me unless you
make
want to
sure
be
you
at the bottom end.
put one
My
lineup in like that to
my
hedge your bets.
my 150 max yesterday. I always look at the top to see how close I was, which I was a couple players away. And then at the bottom, in closing, I'll let you guess. Guess who my quarterback was in my lowest scoring team?
Well, I'm gonna guess it was Joe Burrow.
That was a good guess. He wasn't, but the next quarterback, who would you
The
think?
next most disappointing one that somebody would get into could have been Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. It was Hurts and Brown, right? So there's correlation. I had the Commanders defense across the board, so they came in for me after scaring me, and then I looked and I'm like, okay, next week against the Vikings, since Hurts and Brown didn't, should I fade them? The answer is no. So you
Yeah,
never know,
we'll
right?
avoid them. Then we'll remember that touching that hot stove. We'll avoid them in week 2, and they'll go completely bananas in week 2.
But I'm going to be heavy on Tua. You think anybody else will next week? He and Tyreek will be chalk. I'm already looking forward. I'm thinking I'm gonna I think Waddle is just poised. Tyreek's gonna be the decoy, but we'll see. Thank
Yeah,
you, RC, for everything. I
appreciate it.
appreciate it. I'm gonna end this recording, everybody. It'll be up if you're watching it, it's already up. So hold on.